Dunia Sibomana was 6 years old. He lived in the Congo with his family. Tragically, his mother had died a few years before, and he was raised by his father and extended family. He and his younger brother, who was just 4 years old, regularly played with their cousin. They lived in a rural settlement beside one of Congo's equatorial forests, Virunga National Park, a national park that was home to a large number of chimpanzees. These great apes are highly territorial. They can be incredibly aggressive and brutal towards intruders, regularly patrolling their territories, hunting and eating smaller animals. The park covers an area of more than 3,000 square miles. It is an incredibly biodiverse ecosystem, offering protection for the incredibly rare mountain gorilla. It is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, with 2 active volcanoes being located within the park. It is home to more than 3,000 animal and plant species, 300 of which are endemic to the Albertine Rift Valley in which the park resides. Many communities live in and around the park, competing with the animals found there. Dunia left his home one afternoon in 2013. The weather was clear. He headed outside to play with his younger brother and their older cousin. The 3 of them were inseparable. All similar in age, they loved to play together and explore the outskirts of their village. Although the surrounding wilderness was picture perfect and a huge draw for international tourists, it was also dangerous. Predators and wild animals lived amongst the trees. Poachers and anti-poaching patrols regularly clashed, and armed conflict between the different regions often broke out due to political instability. A troop of chimpanzees was making their way along the forest floor looking for food, always alert to potential threats. They could hear the young children playing a short distance away. A few of the males broke off from the rest of the group, patrolling their territory, moving closer to the youngsters. Then they spotted them through the undergrowth, the 3 children running around after each other on the dry, dusty track that led out of their village bordering the park. Suddenly, Dunia looked up to see 4 fully grown chimpanzees running at them. They covered the ground rapidly and ran straight into the 3 boys. They screamed. Their screams were heard by others in the village who all came running. The attack was brutal. The strength of the chimpanzees was overpowering. It was no match for the tiny children. They brought their hands crashing down on top of the 3 terrified youngsters, cracking ribs and expelling air from their lungs. They gasped, each defenseless against the chimps. They bit into them, their powerful jaws and sharp teeth delivering fatal bites. Blood poured from their open wounds as the frenzy continued. Dunia managed to scramble to his feet and stumble back towards the village, where he bumped into the villagers who had been alerted to their cries. He was barely conscious. Blood ran from his face, which was barely recognizable. He was battered and bruised from being pummeled by the powerful apes. There had been no warning for the attack. The boys had not provoked the chimpanzees. They were merely playing by themselves, oblivious to the fact that they were encroaching on the chimps' territory. But the attackers were merciless and didn't stop until the boys' cries went silent. Dunia's father rushed him to the nearest medical center where he received emergency treatment, but his face was so badly disfigured that no one was sure if he would make it. His right ear and facial muscles were destroyed. The middle finger of his left hand was bitten off, and his lips had been torn from his face. In the forest, Dunia's little brother was found motionless on the ground, his bones broken and skull fractured. His face was bitten and torn. The tiny 4-year-old had succumbed to the brutal attack. The chimpanzees had fled back into the national park, and Dunia's older cousin was nowhere to be found. Rangers set out looking for him, but they found no trace. Many believe that if he hadn't died from his injuries, then he may be hiding out somewhere, perhaps at another village, disfigured and too ashamed to return home to his family. Very slowly, the young Dunia grew stronger from his injuries. His bones healed and his wounds closed up. But the attack left him with a severely disfigured face. He no longer had any lips. His cheek was torn apart and he was left with muscle damage that made it hard to swallow or communicate. He drooled a lot because he couldn't close his mouth or swallow properly. Eating became difficult and he lost weight. The villagers shunned him. He tried to attend school, but the harassment and bullying made it too difficult for him. His friends distanced themselves from him, and adults ignored him. He had no life in the Congo anymore. He was miserable and severely traumatized from the attack. Whilst villagers gave up on Dunia, the rangers at the park didn't. They had contacts with Dr. Richard Leakey, a world-renowned anthropologist who knew a plastic surgeon in the States. Dr. Alexander Dagum and his friend, Dr. Leon Klempner, associate professor of dentistry, both worked at Stony Brook University Hospital. This was the hospital associated with the university where Richard Leakey worked. They managed to arrange for Dunia to visit the hospital in America and undergo surgery to fix his face. His father stayed behind in the Congo, whilst one of the rangers accompanied the young boy to the United States. It was a huge cultural shock for the Congolese boy, and he didn't know what lay ahead of him. But it was the only option he had, and he had to grasp it with both hands. Although he was nervous, the kindness of Richard, Alexander, and Leon shone through. So did that of the American people. Dunia was immediately accepted into the Long Island community. He was taken in by a host family in the Hafog area and attended school there. It was the first time he went to class, and he immediately made friends. He and the 9-year-old daughter of the host family, Annabelle, became best friends, each morning walking arm in arm to elementary school together. He learned English and took a liking to American food, something he had never tasted before. He and Annabelle played endlessly together. She would read him stories at bedtime, play video games with him, and make him snacks. Within days of arriving in America, he underwent surgery. Typically, the reconstruction of a lip is performed using tissue from the other lip, but Dunia had lost both lips. The plastic surgeon took some tissue from his left forearm, which contained a blood vessel and a sensory nerve, and used it to reconstruct Dunia's mouth. The procedure had only been done once or twice before in the whole world, but they needed to give it a go. The hardest part was ensuring that Dunia could have sensation in his lips, which is so important when eating and speaking. The surgery lasted 12 hours, and he had since had 14 more surgeries. But the initial operation was a success, and the boy who had lost all hope and who had been dismissed by those who raised him was now thriving in the U.S. At first, it was assumed that he would return to his home in the Congo and attend boarding school after his year in America, but he decided to stay stateside. He didn't want to return to Africa again. It held too many bad memories for him. In fact, not long after arriving in America, he wanted to forget all about his homeland and refused to speak Swahili, his mother tongue. But his host family persuaded him to spend time with a Congolese family at weekends. They lived locally and helped keep the traditional value of his Congo heritage alive through sharing their culture, language, and clothing with the young Dunia. Gradually, he began to embrace his old life alongside his new one. He attended Long Beach High School, and one thing was for sure, he was a fighter. He had overcome so much in his short life, and it was clear that he was incredibly strong when he focused on moving forward from that disastrous day in the Congo. In fact, he showed how much of a fighter he was when he dedicated his spare time to wrestling. In February 2022, he won the 102-pound wrestling title at the Nassau County High School Wrestling Championships, and then went on to win the state title a couple of weeks later. He is still living in America, studying hard and playing hard, making every second of his life count, something that his little brother never had the chance to do. He was supported by 2 host families in America before being taken in by his Long Beach assistant wrestling coach, Miguel Rodriguez. He and his wife adopted Dunia, and he became a permanent U.S. resident in 2019. From his traumatic early life, Dunia has overcome so much, and with his sporting success, it is unlikely that this will be the last time we hear about him. His life has already been a success story of how a young boy overcame all odds, narrowly escaping his terrifying final affliction. When Andrew Oberle sat in class as an 8-year-old boy, his second-grade teacher taught him and his fellow pupils about Jane Goodall and her amazing research and life with chimpanzees in Africa. He rushed home, inspired by the story, and told his mother then and there that when he grew up, he wanted to work with chimps. There was something about them that fascinated him. He spent as much time as he could at zoos as a child, and then as an adult. He would sit in front of the chimp enclosures and observe their behavior. He would watch them on TV documentaries, demonstrating their tool use, their cleverness, and human-like qualities. His chance at fulfilling a lifetime's ambition came when he was studying for his master's degree in anthropology and primatology at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He arranged to research chimp behavior at South Africa's Chimp Eden for his dissertation project. The sanctuary was founded by Eugene Cussons in collaboration with the Jane Goodall Institute in 2006 to house rescued chimps from Central Africa. Many of the great apes have been victims of the bushmeat trade, having watched their parents butchered by poachers and left to fend for themselves. Others were used as entertainment and forced to perform tricks or subjected to unspeakable cruelty and left in solitary cages all their lives until they were rescued. When Andrew arrived at the sanctuary, he was in heaven. It was exactly the kind of work he had waited his entire life for, and he was eager to get stuck into his research. But tragedy was waiting for him just around the corner. After less than a month working at Chimp Eden, he was giving a tour to some visitors when disaster struck. He paused outside the all-adult enclosure to speak about the individuals they had there and their past history when he spotted a large stone just on the other side of the low-lying electric fence. He casually stepped over the wire and removed the stone. It was something that the chimps could easily have picked up and hurled at unsuspecting visitors. But as Andrew went to step back over the electric wire, he suddenly felt a sharp tug on his legs. The adult males were enraged by the intruder. Although Andrew had meant no harm, he was still in their territory without their permission. They dragged him across the dry ground for more than 30 feet and began pummeling him with their fists. The blows rained down on the young student as he tried to protect himself. A keeper, who saw the attack unfolding, honked the horn of his vehicle and leant out the window and fired a warning shot from his gun. But the crack from the firing gun did nothing to deter the chimps. They savaged Andrew, their sharp teeth cutting into his flesh, ripping at his skin and muscle, tearing it. Even with adrenaline pumping through his body, the pain was indescribable. At first, Andrew begged with the chimps to stop. He knew them individually. That's what added to the pain of the trauma, the fact that he had worked with these animals and to some degree believed that he had gained some kind of trust or mutual understanding with them. "Nicky! Amadeus, stop it! Please don't!" he cried. But it didn't work. They continued their brutal attack. Amadeus lifted Andrew's hand up to his mouth and bit his fingers off one by one. It was like a form of cruel torture. Andrew could only watch as the chimp looked him directly in the eyes while it bit off his fingers one at a time. Andrew was horrified. Then he felt the warm, moist breath of Nicky on his face. He stood on Andrew's chest, pinning him down, and brought his hairy face within an inch of Andrew's. He could smell his breath. He could feel wisps of the chimpanzee's facial fur on his cheek. And then, quick as a flash, Nicky the chimp lunged forwards and bit Andrew's nose clean off. As the attack continued, Andrew didn't think it would ever stop. He could feel the damage the chimps were doing, and nothing he tried would stop them. He had tried to talk to them calmly, trying to make them understand that he was no threat. Then he begged them to stop, and finally he tried to fight back. But with each fully grown male having the strength of 5 men, he didn't stand a chance. Another chimp launched itself at the keeper's vehicle as he tried to stop the attack. It smashed the windscreen and dented the hood, threatening to break into the vehicle and attack him. Instead, he raised his gun and fired through the glass, injuring the chimp, which ran off into the enclosure, closely followed by the others. The chimps had torn Andrew's scalp, peeling the skin back over his skull. They had bitten off both of his ears, half of his right foot, and all the toes from his left foot. The powerful blows that came crashing down on his torso collapsed his lung, and he was left gasping for air by the time the attack was over. He was rushed to the nearest emergency medical clinic. It was a small doctor's surgery, but the staff there saved his life. They used 25 units of blood just to keep him alive whilst they dressed his wounds. He was then transferred to hospital in Johannesburg, where he underwent emergency surgery. He was placed in an induced coma and given an emergency tracheotomy. His parents, who were in the United States, were called and received the devastating news. Andrew was in terrible shape, and they should try and get over to South Africa as quickly as possible. His mother was told not to get her hopes up. Andrew's chances of survival were slim. He spent 2.5 weeks in the induced coma, whilst doctors worked around the clock to tend to his battered and torn body. When he woke up, he saw his parents smiling down at him. He remembered the attack but couldn't work out where he was. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then he tried to move his head, but every inch of his body was sore. When he did manage to look down at his body, all he could see were bloodied bandages from head to toe. He couldn't believe the mess he was in. He couldn't believe the damage that had been done. Then, when the realization of the situation sunk in, he began to feel the physical pain that came from being shredded by the chimpanzees. Most of his backside had been torn off. A goal the doctors set Andrew was for him to sit at the end of his hospital bed for 2 minutes. If he could manage that, then he could fly home and continue his recovery over in the States. His longing for home and to see his faithful dog again drove him to keep going. But sitting up was more difficult than he ever imagined. The pain was incredible. Even when the doctors conducted bandage changes, he was pumped full of painkillers. His mother would place a towel over his head and some headphones over his ears so that he could try and escape the pain of it all. But gradually, day by day, he managed to move a little bit more, until one day, 5 weeks after waking from his coma, Andrew finally managed to sit up for the full 2 minutes. He was on the plane to America in a matter of days, where he met some incredible doctors and plastic surgeons to try and fix his broken face and body. At the St. Louis University Hospital, Chief of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, Dr. Bruce Kramer, took skin and muscle from Andrew's belly to fix his wrist. He then rearranged the tendons in his wrist, enabling Andrew to move it once again, and even get the use of his thumb back, which he lost during the attack but was sewn back on. Using the skin from Andrew's forehead and the cartilage from his ribs, Dr. Michael Bernstein reconstructed Andrew's nose. It took time for Andrew to come to terms with the attack that left him scarred for life. It changed him in so many ways, but due to the strong support network around him from family and friends to doctors, surgeons, and mental health specialists, he was able to recover. He found a new determination to finish his master's thesis. It wasn't going to be the same one he started out in South Africa. He wasn't able to work with chimps again, but this one he completed behind his computer in the comfort of his mother's home. He was eventually awarded his master's and walked out on the stage on his new prosthetics to collect his certificate on Mother's Day, with his mother watching proudly on. Since then, Andrew has helped to set up the Oberle Institute, a trauma program that helps patients thrive in recovery and get back out into the world after devastating and life-changing events. But no matter the amount of trauma recovery programs Andrew has taken, he can never escape the terrifying memories of the day he had his face ripped apart by 2 chimpanzees, narrowly escaping his horrifying final affliction. St. James and LaDonna met in West Covina, California, and became high school sweethearts, dating for several years. Despite the growing pressure around them to finally tie the knot, the two stalled their holy matrimony. St. James had a few misgivings about settling down. As a NASCAR driver and car enthusiast, St. James felt marriage would hinder him from pursuing his passions. However, in 1966, he succumbed to the pressure, and their marriage was put in place in a small brick church in the same town where they met. Unfortunately, the tall, good-looking NASCAR driver experienced cold feet and never showed up at the wedding. Instead, he spent the day with his one true love, tinkering with cars. Meanwhile, LaDonna was left in the church, embarrassed and alone with her friends and relatives. St. James couldn't have thought of a better way to gain the entire neighborhood's exasperation. For the next few years, he was the talk of the town. The mere utterance of his name left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. Finding a way to escape the wrath of the town folks, St. James discovered what he sought in a newspaper ad. A merchant ship was looking for additional crew members for a long-distance trip. More importantly, all the expenses would be shouldered by the company. St. James jumped at the opportunity. For the next few months, St. James traveled around the world on a ship, despite not having been on a boat before. While on his travels, something unexpected and life-changing happened to St. James. It was an event that instigated his lifelong love and tragic fall from grace. As the ship heaved near the coast of Africa, it was forced to land in Tanzania after a malfunction. St. James had to spend a few days there and acquainted himself with a group of Tanzanian hunters. In a forest hunt, the Tanzanian hunters killed a female chimpanzee after it gave birth, leaving the newborn chimp to fend for itself. Feeling sorry for what he witnessed, St. James decided to care for the animal, and the rest was history. Getting home was difficult, but St. James found a few German missionaries who helped him secure a flight back to LA. At this point, the chimp, or Mo, as St. James called him, was already his boy. Arriving at the airport, Estelle, his mother, welcomed him. Accompanying her was LaDonna, who was fuming with rage and despair. After all, St. James hasn't shown his face to her since their supposed wedding day. As angry as LaDonna was, she couldn't help but notice something was different about St. James. Well, he was carrying a baby chimpanzee in place of his luggage, for one. It was awkward between LaDonna and St. James. However, Mo's arrival in their life helped dissipate any resentment from LaDonna. Sure enough, LaDonna's mother and Estelle, who were close friends, fell head over heels for Mo. Soon, LaDonna did too, and so the couple got back together. On June 6, 1970, St. James and LaDonna became the Davises in a modest ceremony. Mo was the best man. It was the beginning of an unconventional but happy household. Tragic news, however, seldom came at a favorable time. A year into the marriage, LaDonna was diagnosed with cancer. Worse, she needed a hysterectomy. For someone who wanted to be a mother, LaDonna was devastated. She wanted to initiate a divorce from St. James, ashamed she could no longer bear a child. However, St. James only responded with the following: "We already got a kid." As LaDonna wailed on St. James' shoulder, Mo sat quietly on his chair and stared at the couple. From then on, he became their child, a child who was never human, but he was just as complex. There were times when the Davises would be surprised at the range of emotions Mo expressed. As years passed, tragedy found a way to seep into their lives. One day, on August 1998, a welder came over to fix Mo's cage. However, he left a piece of equipment that gave Mo an electrical shock, scaring him and causing him to run away. Missing for a few hours, the Davises were forced to call the police. However, by the time Mo was found, he had already dented a police car and injured an officer. A year later, a visitor came to meet Mo. Despite being told not to put her hand inside a cage, the woman did anyway. Consequently, Mo bit her fingertip, mistaking her red fingernail for his favorite snack, candy licorice. This was the final straw, and the intervening officials of West Covina deemed Mo a danger to the city. Police officers armed with tranquilizer guns arrived at the Davis residence to take Mo. Though he resisted, St. James was wrestled and pinned to the ground. He could only wail as the officers ran inside their house to take his beloved boy. Seeing his father hurt, Mo screamed wildly and banged his hands and feet against the cage. Police swarmed him and shot him with a dart gun squarely in the stomach. Afterward, they tossed the unconscious chimp inside a horse trailer, far from the cozy cage he knew. The dream had unraveled itself, and St. James and LaDonna could do nothing about it. What came after were years of trial and much attention from the public. In 2004, St. James and LaDonna succeeded in getting Mo transferred to Animal Haven Ranch, a private sanctuary where the couple could visit Mo without restrictions. However, on Mo's 39th birthday, a truly horrifying incident would spill into the lives of the Davises. It was a fine morning on March 3, 2005. For the second time, St. James and LaDonna checked the items in the car. They sifted through the piles of toys, balloons, and presents, wondering if they had missed anything. They brought a white frosted sheet cake with raspberry filling. It was Mo's birthday after all. With St. James behind the wheel and LaDonna in the shotgun, the two made their way out the driveway and rode to the Animal Haven Ranch. It was a 3-hour drive, but they were used to it. Knowing their son was waiting for them made the trip all the more worthwhile. St. James hurriedly parked the car in a vacant space near the entrance and grabbed a small carton of chocolate milk. He hopped out of the car and briskly walked toward Mo. LaDonna beamed a smile and followed suit when she brought the cake. Mo clapped his hands and howled wildly, ecstatic to see his parents. He may not have known it was his birthday, but he knew they loved him. LaDonna brought the cake down, cut a few slices, and handed them to St. James and then to Mo. It was a picture-perfect family reunion. However, something sinister brewed in the distance. A few yards away from LaDonna, a young adult male chimpanzee made its way out of its cage and crept slowly toward them. LaDonna spotted the creature, locking eyes with it. The chimp stood formidably, puffing its chest and exposing its entire upper body that was stronger than 4 men. The chimp decided to charge. The eerie silence of the park erupted into chaos, filled with LaDonna's frightful screams. Seeing the chimp run toward his wife, St. James rushed to the rescue. As the two got closer, the chimp reached LaDonna and pummeled her back, knocking her into St. James' arms. The chimp somehow managed to lock its powerful jaws on LaDonna's left hand, clamping on her delicate thumb. The creature yanked on it, removing her finger like a potato from the ground. The chimp wanted LaDonna's head, but St. James managed to push her underneath their picnic table. LaDonna screamed and tried to command the chimp to stop and submit. However, it was to no avail. The wild chimp may have looked similar to Mo, but it was not cut from the same cloth. Blocking the rampaging chimp, St. James readied himself to receive the creature's wrath. However, the 6 foot 2 inches former running back didn't expect to see another chimp running toward him. It was bigger and older. One look, and he knew it was more dangerous than the first one. His heart sank, and St. James let out an unrecognizable scream. With all his might, he pushed the bigger chimp away, but it pounced on his back, prompting the smaller one to follow suit. One of them clamped its mighty jaws on St. James' face, crushing the bone above his eyebrow. The creatures then stuck its fingers into St. James' eye socket, gouging out his eye. The wild chimps continued to mutilate St. James, biting off his nose and chewing away at his fingers. They tore him to shreds, ripping the face of his skin, lips, and most of his teeth. Finally, as he lay helpless on the ground, they began chomping away at his buttocks, biting his genitals. They castrated him, and there was blood everywhere. LaDonna could do nothing but scream. Eventually, it reached Mark Carruthers, the ranch owner's son-in-law. He came running toward the commotion armed with a revolver. He let loose a shot at the younger, smaller chimp, but it had no effect. Mark quickly ran back to his house and grabbed a more powerful gun. Mark returned, pointed his gun at the bigger chimp, and let loose a shot directed at its head. The chimp's brain exploded, and it fell to the ground. In response, the younger chimp began dragging St. James' body away from Mark. Kneeling down, Mark aimed at the chimp's chest and let loose another shot. It fell down instantaneously, dropping on St. James' back. When paramedics arrived, St. James was unrecognizable. His face was reduced to a bloody lump with a hole. There was so much of his blood at the scene, even the paramedics could not believe the brutality chimpanzees were capable of. The doctors reconstructed his face through dozens of surgeries after putting him into a medically induced coma. In the subsequent investigation, it was discovered that one of the sanctuary owners accidentally left the chimpanzee's cage open. However, even though St. James was now utterly reliant on LaDonna due to his permanent injuries, the two still visited Mo regularly. Unfortunately, tragedy was not done with the Davises. In 2007, Mo disappeared after supposedly breaking out of his cage. An extensive search was done shortly after. However, they found no traces of Mo. The search for Mo bled through the weeks, and then weeks turned into months, and eventually into years. Mo was never found. St. James and LaDonna could do nothing but wait. They still hold out onto the hope that they could see Mo again someday. Today, the life of the Davises revolves around caring for St. James. Although he bears the massive scars from the attack, St. James suffers from a much more painful, invisible wound. I can talk for days about Mo. I just miss him so much. I've never loved anything as much as I loved Mo. After 30 years of caring for Mo, the Davises must somehow find a way to live without him. As for St. James, his life will never be the same, and his scars are just a reminder of the day his pet chimpanzee Mo nearly took him to his final affliction. The following story is regarded as one of the most brutal and horrifying chimpanzee attacks in recorded history. Our story takes place in the tropical jungle of Sierra Leone. Inside this green paradise, a wide variety of plant life and wild animals flourished until one day a war broke out, bringing with it a never-before-seen demand for land, fuel, and resources. Sierra Leone's population of chimpanzees suffered the harshest consequences, as this war ravaged the once picturesque landscape they called home. Previously, a flourishing community of chimpanzees existed, intertwined by indestructible family bonds, and with a population of approximately 30,000. However, this population size was dramatically reduced to just a few thousand due to habitat destruction and ruthless slaughtering by the inhabitants of the jungle zone. These soldiers would typically kill the adult chimpanzees, only to abduct their young and sell them off as pets within the local black market. This prompted several animal rights activists to call for the construction of havens, where these animals would be protected from the vile greed and unceasing savagery of humans, in hopes of preserving this now endangered species. The Takugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary is one of these havens, located near the capital of Sierra Leone. This sanctuary has offered shelter for orphaned and traumatized chimpanzees for nearly 30 years. The abused chimpanzees that sought refuge in the sanctuary were scarred by years of abuse by soldiers throughout the war. For the majority of them, the slaughter of their families was their first introduction to humanity. Some had their teeth smashed in or were confined in cramped cages for days. Others were even made to consume alcohol for the amusement of humans. Regarded as a tourist attraction, Takugama attracts visitors from across the world, shining light on the consequences and cruelty of human expansion on the local wildlife. In 2006, Alan Robertson, Gary Brown, and Richie Goody were subcontractors working on the construction of the American Embassy building in Sierra Leone when they were offered the chance to visit the Takugama Chimpanzee Refuge. The exciting offer made by their friend and local guide Melvin Mama was met with unanimous approval, and the four men called for a taxi to begin the journey toward Takugama. The cab made the 30-minute trip up a mountainside to Takugama on Sunday, April 23rd. As they sat inside the taxi, the four men admired the gorgeous countryside, while Melvin told interesting facts about the country's rich history. Unbeknownst to them, as their car mounted the final slope into the 100-acre preserve, things had gone horribly wrong on the other side of the front gates. Workers inside the refuge were in the process of feeding the chimps when a group of them suddenly became enraged and managed to escape the electrified fence surrounding the compound. This incident sparked one of the most brutal and gruesome chimpanzee attacks in recorded history. The chimps went on a rampage, tearing apart anyone who was misfortunate enough to have crossed their path. The newly formed pack of chimps consisted of 31 young adults and was led by a chimp known as Bruno, a 270-pound, 6-foot-tall alpha male who suffered from severe trauma after he was taken from his mother as an infant. After witnessing his entire family get slaughtered by humans, he was later sold on the black market for a measly $30. It's not always the biggest and most aggressive male that commands the troop in chimpanzee culture. Instead, the elders of the pack choose a deserving leader. Even if a particularly powerful male defeats and coerces all of his rivals into submission, the chimpanzee society of elders may not give him their blessing to lead. Alphas are charged with the burdensome duty of looking after everyone and, if necessary, defending the entire pack down to its weakest member. Aside from being the undisputed alpha, Bruno was a massive chimpanzee by any standards. He easily towered over every other member of his pack. It seemed that Bruno held a deep-seated hatred for humans, despite the kindness later shown to him by sanctuary workers. Hatred, which the four men, alongside their driver Issa Kanu, were about to become all too familiar with. The vehicle soon came across a closed fence meant to keep unannounced visitors out. As the men sat waiting inside their car, Issa blasted his horn in the hopes that someone would come out and open the gates for them. However, the sound of the car's horn had attracted the attention of the last thing the men wanted to see that morning: Bruno. Bruno soon emerged from deep within the forest, accompanied by his group of loyal, bloodthirsty followers. The chimpanzees soon encircled the taxi, screaming and banging at its doors and windows as the group watched in horror from the inside. Bruno was so big that the group initially mistook him for a gorilla. Quickly realizing the danger they were in, Issa put the car in reverse and hit the gas pedal as hard as he could. As the car suddenly flung backwards, Bruno gave chase and easily overtook the speeding vehicle. He jumped atop the car's hood, screaming angrily as he displayed his terrifyingly sharp teeth. He began bashing the car's hood and front windshield in an attempt to get inside the car. As the car continued to roll downhill, Bruno would shift his focus onto the vehicle's rear windows, smashing through the glass and beginning his assault by mauling Melvin. Bruno began biting his hand while viciously shaking his head, which tore through the flesh and bone, while Melvin screamed out in pain. He struggled to fight him off with the help of his friends, but Bruno was too strong. Desperate to escape their predicament, one of the men told Issa to shift the automobile into forward gear. Upon doing so, the vehicle abruptly came to a stop and veered off in a new direction. Bruno, whose sharp teeth now sank as deep as they could inside Melvin's arm, was caught off guard by the sudden change in motion and was flung back out of the same window he came in through. Alan and Gary grabbed Melvin by the legs just before he was fully dragged out by Bruno, and the two men began hoisting him back inside the car. After the shock of the attack wore off, the pain began to set in. To Melvin's horror and disbelief, almost half of his hand, along with 3 of his fingers, were now gone. Gary attempted to calm Melvin down while tearing off a piece of cloth from his shirt to wrap around his hand, which now resembled a drooping mass of skin. Issa was beginning to lose his grip as fear and anxiety began to take over his mind. He was a local of Sierra Leone and knew what chimps were capable of. He had witnessed with his own eyes how a horde of chimpanzees could tear apart a human within seconds. Issa threw caution to the wind and continued pushing forward, driving right through the bloodthirsty horde of chimps toward the locked gate of the sanctuary. He had every intent of ramming through the gate as the others pleaded for him to slow down. Eventually reaching top speed, the vehicle collided with the heavy metal gates. The collision was so violent that it briefly knocked everyone unconscious. Gary was awoken by the gut-wrenching sound of Melvin's screams. Gary looked around the now run-down vehicle, only to notice everyone had vanished, and he was alone in the car. Gary turned his eyes to where the screams were coming from, only to witness Bruno dragging helpless Melvin away from the car as the vicious horde began ravaging him. Adamant on saving his friend, Gary picked up a sharp wooden log after exiting the vehicle, while letting out an angry roar in hopes of attracting Bruno's attention away from Melvin. Most wild chimpanzees shy away from direct confrontation with humans, even though they are much stronger physically. A human's natural posture makes them appear taller and more intimidating to the chimpanzee. Domesticated chimpanzees, however, or at least the ones who spent a good portion of their lives living among humans like Bruno did, quickly realize the physical advantage they possess over humans, both in terms of strength and agility. Bruno, who accepted the challenge, began the charge towards Gary, pounding and flailing his arms around as he stood on his back legs to appear taller. Bruno, who was 6 feet tall, easily towered over Gary, who was only 5'9". But Gary remained calm as the beast leapt onto him. Gary raised up his weapon, struck Bruno in the neck and knocked him down. Bruno attempted to get up, but Gary wouldn't let him. Bruno's pack froze in fear as Gary pummeled him over and over with the wooden log. Bruno, who later gave up and began showing submissive behavior towards Gary, retreated back into the forest and disappeared. Witnessing the defeat of their leader, the angry horde of chimps grew even quieter as they dissipated into the forest from where they came. After his victory, Gary turned his eyes toward Melvin while trying to pull him up onto his feet. Melvin could no longer stand on his own, as it appeared Bruno had bitten off most of his right foot. After making sure the horde was gone, Gary informed Melvin was going to find help. As he traversed the unfamiliar forest, he eventually came across Richie and Alan. He instructed them to go and find help while he tended to Melvin, but before they left, he noticed Issa was nowhere to be seen. Richie informed Gary that after Issa's failed attempt at breaching the sanctuary's metal gate, he exited the vehicle and climbed over it, while leaving the rest of them to fend for themselves. As he headed toward the main road, Gary nodded in disappointment before warning the two men to stay vigilant and watch their backs. After eventually getting back to Melvin, he tied another piece of cloth around his right foot in attempts to stop the bleeding. Melvin leaned on Gary's back for support as the two made their way toward the main road, where they eventually came across a military van. Apparently, Richie and Alan had managed to reach a military patrol unit and informed the soldiers of their whereabouts. The van soon picked them up and rushed Melvin toward the nearest medical facility, where he could receive treatment for his injuries. Gary breathed a sigh of relief as he knew Melvin and the others would be okay, yet he still couldn't believe or fully process the events of this horrific day. While Gary, Melvin, Richie, and Alan all made it out safely, a crueler fate awaited Issa, who was later found bloody and torn apart. His jawless, disemboweled body was ravaged beyond recognition. The angry horde of chimpanzees appeared to have caught up with him, tearing all 4 of his limbs from his body before feasting on his remains. Bruno, on the other hand, could never be found. While 27 of the 31 escaped chimps were eventually retrieved, Bruno was among the 4 who were not. Many attempts at locating and bringing back Bruno were launched, and all were met with failure. Even though sightings of Bruno were regularly reported, to this day he still manages to somehow evade his pursuers. It's almost as if he's developed heightened senses that warn him when he's being hunted by humans. Fitting, considering the amount of abuse he'd suffered because of humans. The group will never forget their close encounter with death in the forest of Sierra Leone. Gary, in particular, suffered from nightmares for months after the terrifying incident. He considers himself lucky that he managed to fight off Bruno and rescue Melvin. He's thankful of being able to reach safety, unlike Issa, who was tragically ambushed by the savage beasts, screaming in horror as he succumbed to his final affliction. Jerome and Sandra Harold were a devoted couple who lived in Stamford, Connecticut. They were a lovely family with only one daughter named Susan. Susan was soon married, eloping with her husband, and the once lively and busy house was reduced to quietness. On October 24, 2003, the lonely couple got tired of the boredom and bought a 3-day-old chimp for $50,000. The chimp, whom they named Travis after Sandra's favorite country music star Travis Tritt, lived with the couple at their home. The couple bathed, bottle-fed, dressed, and even brushed Travis's teeth. They loved and adored the chimp, treating him as their own surrogate baby. He had brought a renewed sense of purpose and liveliness into the house, providing something to keep the couple busy following their daughter's departure. As Travis grew, he embraced the ways of his human parents, learning how to decipher their verbal and nonverbal language. The couple had to restructure their house to accommodate the fast-growing chimp. They created a huge room and hung swinging tires on ropes for Travis to play and roam. He was ever busy swinging and jumping on the couch and bed as the couple worked on other errands. At the dinner table, Travis had a seat and a stemmed wine glass. He took his meals with the family. The couple had really pampered him. Soon, everyone in Stamford knew him. Neighbors and the police held and waved at Travis whenever they saw him. His friendly nature won the residents' hearts, and within no time, he was a local celebrity. He could dress himself, feed hay to the horses, open locked doors with a key, as well as water plants. To him, technology was a curious feat that he strived to learn. His love for baseball had him mastering watching TV using the remote control. The chimp could also boot and log into the family computer and browse pictures. He had a weak spot for ice cream, which had him memorizing the days and times that the ice cream truck passed by the house. In 2003, the couple headed to town to replenish their supplies, carrying Travis in the back seat with his window partially open. They were stuck in traffic when a person walking past threw an empty soda can into the car, hitting Travis. Calmly, Travis unbuckled his seatbelt, unlocked the car door, and chased after the culprit. However, Travis didn't catch up with him. He then knuckle-walked to the tarmac, lay on his stomach, and started rolling, bringing the traffic to a halt. The traffic officers had to call for backup, as the drivers and other locals were treated to a humorous chase. Travis smiled as he skidded and jumped over cars, evading the over a dozen police officers after him. The chase went on for almost 2 hours before a tired Travis finally walked himself back into the car and buckled his seatbelt. This incident led to the Connecticut authorities passing a law that ordered no resident to own a pet primate weighing more than 50 pounds. Travis was luckily exempted from the rule because the Heralds had owned him for long and the authorities believed he posed no risk. Unfortunately, in 2004, a year after this incident, Jerome Harold lost his battle with stomach cancer. This left Sandra and Travis, who saw Jerome as his alpha, deeply devastated. The home was once again covered by a cloud of sadness as Sandra was down in the dumps. However, that wasn't the only pressing issue, as soon enough, officers from the Stamford Animal Control Department started knocking at her door. The officers were concerned for Sandra's safety. With Travis transitioning into early childhood, he had now amassed enough strength to equal 5 muscular men. He was prone to aggression, especially during his adolescence, which meant he would be hard and harmful for Sandra to control. The animal control officers advised Sandra that keeping the chimp in the coming years was impractical. Having never shown any signs of aggression or violence, Sandra was not worried. With grief over her gone husband gripping her like a vice, Sandra sunk into depression, halting all her social activities and communication. She spent days sitting and rocking back and forth on her chair by their yard as she watched the sunsets. Her unstable and vulnerable condition had profound effects on Travis, who spent his days eating snacks as he watched TV. He never left the house, and with little to no physical activity, Travis found himself ghastly obese at 240 pounds. His once shiny face had turned black, full of wrinkles. His chest had shifted from sturdy to flabby as hair loss took over. On Sunday, February the 15th, 2009, Sandra picked up her phone and rang her close friend Charla Nash, inviting her for a lively chat. Sandra and Charla had been friends for years, and she was a frequent visitor to the Herald's house. Travis knew Charla, having seen her uncountable times. After catching up, the two left Travis alone and headed to Mohegan Sun Casino. They began with the salon and had their hair made before heading for dinner. Afterwards, the duo enjoyed gambling before heading home. On setting foot into the house, an eerie feeling stirred Sandra differently. She noticed that Travis was uninterested in his favorite ice cream. The TV and computer were off, which was odd, considering how much Travis loved his shows. Sandra mixed with the chimp's tea before retiring to bed. The next morning, February 16, 2009, Sandra woke up to find Travis aimlessly romping in the yard. She tried calling him back into the house, but he ignored. Something was off. She immediately rang Charla and informed her of Travis's behavior. Without hesitation, Charla got into her car and sped to Sandra's home to help her get Travis back into the house. She alighted and picked Travis's favorite toy, a red Tickle Me Elmo, that she hoped was a good bait to lure Travis back into the house. The duo, feeling confident in their ability to handle Travis, headed out to the yard. But on seeing his favorite toy, Travis snapped. As if driven by a fierce possessiveness over his favorite toy, Travis lunged forward, throwing Charla to the ground. He then stood over her, and using his massive jaws, he sunk his teeth into her face. As Travis's jaws clamped, Charla let out a chilling scream that echoed through the neighborhood. Travis ripped off her lips and nose and tore her eyelids. Sandra quickly grabbed a shovel and hit Travis several times, but he was unstoppable. He continued biting and attacking Charla, completely crashing her facial structure. Sandra dashed back to the house, grabbed a kitchen knife, and stormed back out to help her friend. Travis was so engrossed in the rampage that he didn't notice Sandra approaching him. With all her might, Sandra plunged the knife into the chimp's back and took a step back. Travis stopped mauling Charla and turned, glaring at Sandra with his eyes wild with rage. He then turned to Charla and continued mauling her as if nothing had happened. Charla could hear the sounds of her own bones snapping as Travis bit off her left hand. She shouted at him, "Travis, stop!" But Travis was in a frenzy. Seeing the ferocity of Travis and foreseeing that she was going to be next, Sandra got into her car and locked all the doors. Her hands were shaking with fear and her heart pounding in her chest as she fumbled for her phone and called 911.
What's the problem?
Police! Send the police!
What's the problem there?
The chimp killed my friend!
What's the problem with your friend?
Oh, please!
What's the problem with your friend? I need to know.
Send the police up! With a gun! With a gun! He ripped her face off!
He ripped her face off?
He's trying to attack me! Please,
Okay,
hurry!
I need you to calm down a little bit. They're on the way. Can you put yourself away? I don't want the monkey attacking you.
Please, hurry up! Listen to me!
They're on the way, ma'am.
Guns! They gotta shoot him, please! Please, hurry!
Are you there with your friend? I need you to help your friend. Can you go help your
I
friend?
can't! He tried to attack me now!
Is he still there with your friend?
Yes,
Okay, so then back off. Then don't get any closer, okay? They're already on the way.
please.
If the monkey moves away from your friend, let me know, okay? So we could try to help your friend.
No, I can't. She's dead. She's dead.
Why are you saying that she's dead?
She's dead. He ripped her apart.
He ripped what apart? Her face?
Everything.
He ripped her apart?
I think I'm gonna faint. I think I'm gonna pass out.
No, just breathe, okay? I'm gonna stay with you on the phone until they get there.
Listen to me. Please hurry. Please hurry. Oh my God.
Sandra felt like her heart was in her throat as she watched Charla lie unconscious. Officer Frank Chiafari, who was the first to respond to the 911 call, found Travis roaming in the yard as Charla lay unconscious with her tattered clothes covered in her own blood. The enraged Travis then circled the police car, looking for an open door. Inside, Officer Frank was scared to death as the 240-pound chimp smashed the passenger window and unlocked the door. The officer fired 4 shots at Travis. The injured chimp stumbled into the house, got on his bed, and took his last breath. In the following months, Charla underwent multiple surgeries to restore her distorted face. Her left hand had been mauled, as well as 3 fingers on her right hand. Her injuries were so severe that the medical team under her care had to undergo counseling because of the trauma of tending to her. The toxicology report on Travis revealed that he had been dosed with which may have fueled his aggression. Others argued that Charla had changed her hair color and curls, making her unrecognizable as she held Travis's favorite doll, which spooked him. No matter what caused Travis to attack, Charla still lives with the trauma and scars that came with it. constantly reminding her of the day she narrowly escaped her final affliction.